Finance Department is going to present the stormwater budget. He and I will present portions of the current 10-year long-term financial plan that we've developed for preliminary budgets are due from those departments in early December. And in the month of January, we internally have a budget committee that comprises all the chiefs. So that would be the CEO, the CFO, Chief Operating Officer, Chief Legal Officer, and Chief Administrative Officer. We review the submitted budgets of all the departments. These budgets have been reviewed and approved by that committee, and that's why we're presenting them to you here today. So I will start off by going into the 2022 sewer operating budget overview. So I'll begin by comparing our proposed 2022 budget to the 2022 rate study. We are in the first year of our 2022 through 2026 rate study, and therefore, as expected, the variances from that rate study are small at this point. The largest variance is revenue. We're projecting about 4.9% higher revenue than the rate study had projected, and that was due to last year's strong results in terms of water consumption. We ended 2021 with a 0.8% decline in consumption compared to our budgeted for last year 5% decline, but typically 2%, and that's what we were using in the rate study. Operating expenses are slightly lower than the rate study projections. Capital expenditures just 1.1% higher, and debt service slightly lower, all in line with the projections from the rate study. So comparing 2021 budget to 2022 budget, beginning with revenue, as I mentioned, our 2021 stormwater sewer revenue was influenced heavily by the 2020 conditions related to the pandemic. We had planned for a 5% decline in consumption, but consumption rebounded better than expected. We saw that 0.8% decline. So this year's budget, due to that, the COVID impacts of the 2021 budget, this year's operating revenue budget is about 11.7% higher. We projected a 3% decline in consumption for this year, and this year also reflects the 4.2% rate increase. Operating expenses are nearly flat compared to last year, up less than $1 million. The capital expenditures planned for this year are higher as we move through some large projects in the consent decree. And then debt service for 2022 is expected to be just under $120 million, which is in line with our projections. It is slightly reduced from the rate study due to the 2021 bond refinancing, as well as the debt defeasance that we executed in December. So I will now move forward with some detail on all of these items. So beginning with revenue, comparing the 2021 preliminary actuals to the 2022 budget, the breakdown is very similar. As always, over 90% of our revenue is billed by our billing agents, with the City of Cleveland Water Department being the largest by far. We do direct bill some large industrial customers, as well as about 1,500 accounts that are serviced by Rural Lorraine Water. Another item of note related to revenue for 2022 is the board may recall we did in fall of 2021 begin the certification of delinquent accounts for the first time since the pandemic started. We do anticipate moving forward with a full certification in March of 2022. of all outstanding balances. When we moved in 2021 in September, we had identified items that were outstanding prior to 2020, so 12/31/19 balances and older, pre-pandemic balances. And we have not certified any accounts for 2021 or 2020 at this point, but we do anticipate that. Right now, the preliminary numbers reflected approximately 15,000 accounts that would be affected, about $18.7 million of sewer outstanding balances and $2.3 million in stormwater outstanding balances, for about $21 million total. That number will come down as we work through the accounts to validate payment plans and other criteria that make sure those customers do not get certified. But it will be a sizable certification. In a typical year, we would do about $6 million total in a year. So just under normal circumstances, we'd expect to see 12, and this is higher than that. We will update the board with what the actual certification is, probably at the second meeting in March or the first meeting in April.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, just on that point, because that certainly is it's a critical issue, but it's a very sensitive issue. There obviously is no such thing as free water, free sewer, but a lot of this happened during the period of time when there were moratoriums, et cetera. And to the extent that we can continue to advocate for our customers on either ways that we can have affordability options for them, or cash infusion from the federal government to help them satisfy the delinquent accounts, but at the same time, to the extent they can't make the district whole, I think we need to figure out how to kind of walk that line really finely, so because that's an important issue for not just the vitality of this organization, but for the region in general. So if we could continue to share with this body any actions or movements that take place that help facilitate that outcome, that would be appreciated.
Sure. Good morning, President Brown and Mayor Ally and Ms. Chambers. We sent out what we call soft letters a month ago to every single person that we were certifying, letting them know that they were on the list, letting them know of the opportunities for them to call us to get on payment plans, but also reminding them of the LIWAP money, which is the new money that's coming down for folks from the federal government, as well as the fact that there are still COVID-related funds available from Step Forward and CHN in our community. So we did that, I would say, about a month and a half ago. And so now, so that brought the list down to more like 13,000, and we are scrubbing it a second time. We think it'll bring the list down even further. So we're constantly making people aware of the opportunities there are for debt relief that are out here from the federal government, and also through our cost-saving programs as well. And we'll continue that effort throughout.
All right, I appreciate that. Thank you.
And I'll just add also, President Brown, that soft letter is actually a new step this year. We always give a notice of 30 days ahead of time to allow customers to know and have time to enter a payment plan or make other arrangements. This soft letter, 2 months out, is an additional step that we implemented this year for all the reasons you mentioned.
And just to follow up on Constance's point, we are doing the outreach, and we kind of do know what the general number of people that are affected by this and who they are actually. So the ability for us to directly mail them, because it's amazing how many people don't know what's available as a resource to help them. And so to the extent that we can say to them, you are eligible for X, Y, or Z, I think it's helpful. I think anything that we do in terms of marketing or outreach to help facilitate either that discussion or the outcome is a good public service opportunity for us.
Absolutely.
And I know you've thought of that already, so we've talked about it. So
Yeah, I would agree. When we do a great job, but unless you almost hand feed folks,
Yeah, sure.
getting out there and sending them direct letters, that is probably a key. And the new way you're going about it, I hope really helps out as well as it can. Any more comments? Okay.
So moving on to an overview of operating expenses for sewer. The sewer preliminary budget, this is a gross budget before adjustments for capitalized labor charged to projects, indirect costs charged to the stormwater program, is about $144.8 million. That is above last year's operating actuals. I will go through the breakdown of some of the differences and some of the major categories that make up that budget. But as you can see, the categorical breakdown is typical from year to year. Salaries and wages and benefits always make up over 50% of the operating expenses, with professional services, contractual service, utilities being the other major categories. One last item I want to note as it relates to the 2022 budget and our efforts to continually cut costs and remain efficient. The 2022 budget is still below the levels we had for our 2018 operating budget. So begin by looking at that largest category of salaries and wages and benefits. Salaries and wages is our largest expense. The significant portion of that is in operations, where most of our staff is, but this reflects the number for all of our staff. We're anticipating total salaries of $58.5 million. We currently have 87 open positions. I will talk about that a bit more on the next slide. Salaries and wages are increased for 2021 actuals for two reasons. One, as I mentioned in my year-end presentation, we had significant turnover last year, so we did have a lot of budgeted salary that went unpaid. We always have employees who go on leave and other types of reasons why some of those salary dollars go unspent. Also factored into this increase was for 2022 the 4% increase to non-union salaries, as well as the negotiated 2.5% for union salaries. Just as a reminder to the committee that all staff received a 0% increase in 2021 as a result of the pandemic. The non-union's salary going forward is to be determined, and the union's third year of their current contract next year calls for 3.5% increase to their base salaries. As it relates to benefits, healthcare is our biggest cost. Benefits are increasing $3.7 million from the 2021 actuals, with healthcare increase expected to be about $2.7 million of that. Also included in benefits is our contribution to the retirement system OPERS for our employees. That represents about $8 million of benefit costs for 2022.
Ken, can I stop you there for a minute?
Yes.
The Medicare last year was budgeted $320,000, and it only spent $73,000. This year it's back up to $831,000. Do you expect to spend the $831,000? Can you explain why it was only $73,000 last year?
Yes, Mayor, that is correct. That is actually a mapping error in that specific report. We did spend about $750,000 in that account. We expect to be near that number again. The total for that category is correct, but some of the specific accounts didn't get mapped correctly. We'll update that report for the final version that goes to the board.
Okay, that explains it. Can you real quickly, the wellness credit, is that a similar $28,000 when you have $111,000 for this year?
That is correct. That was just an issue where they were mapped incorrectly.
All right, that makes sense. Thank you.
I apologize for that. So looking at staffing levels for sewer, we're proposing an increase of 2 staff for 2022. A quick summary of those changes: operation and maintenance, where the majority of staff is, was no net change. The administration and external affairs department has 5 added staff, as well as 3 specific that I will ask Constance to talk about briefly. Finance was down 1 person, district administration and watersheds were up 1, and engineering and construction were down 4, for a total net of +2. And I will ask Constance to talk about the main driver for the change in her area is the addition of 3 engineering, science, and construction management development personnel. I'll let her talk about this program and what it means.
Yeah, thank you. It is a mouthful. This program called the Engineering, Science, and Construction Management Development Program. We're thinking about getting a shorter name, but that's what it is right now. This is the brainchild of the Engineering and Construction Department, Watersheds, and Operations. This is in a rotational program. It's a pipeline development for entry-level professionals who are underrepresented in some of these areas. So that would be potentially minority candidates as well as women. So they would come into the program shortly after their graduation from college. Their majors would be in STEM fields, so it would be engineering, science, water management, environmental science, or environmental engineering, for example. They would rotate between the departments, engineering, watersheds, operations, and our technical services department, and get a very broad experience in our operations. The hope would be that they would be able to apply for open positions and come in into entry-level managerial positions. So this is the design of the program. We'll start this year. We'll start with a cohort of 3 individuals. So that's what our hope is, and we'll be keeping you posted and introducing you to the candidates as they're identified.
So moving on to the next major category, making up the sewer operating expenses, is professional services. As you can see, looking at the historical actuals, there's a dramatic decline there. Those peak years in 2018 and 19 was when engineering was in the throes of multiple local sewer service evaluation studies, sewer system evaluation studies. Those have wound down. There's a little bit of that still in this year's budget, but those have significantly reduced, nearing their end, and now our professional services are returning to more historical levels. Some of the highlights in the professional services include about $800,000 in engineering for those SSES projects, $800,000 in engineering, $400,000 for SSES projects, and $250,000 for general engineering services. Other items of note include in the customer service department $1.4 million for our contract with CHN Housing Partners to administer our affordability programs and sewer assistance. About $700,000 in the HR department for training, and $1.1 million in the legal department for various outside legal support. Contractual services is the next large category. There's a lot of different items in this category, the largest of which is our collection fees. That's about half of this $20.8 million category. We're anticipating collection fees of about $10.3 million from our collection agents this year, 10.1 from the City of Cleveland. We are in the process of negotiating a new contract with the City of Cleveland for the next 5 years, so we have budgeted in an anticipated increase. We will know the actuals probably by the end of the second quarter or so. Large category in this group is also the solids handling, so that's a variety of activities at the plants. grease removal of about $31,000, grit and screening disposal of $479,000, sludge hauling disposal $978,000, and ash hauling disposal of $776,000 for a total of $2.3 million in solids handling. We have $1.4 million in anticipated insurance premiums. We are anticipating increases in those premiums for the second half of the year, mainly around cyber and property insurance. And another item of note in this area is green infrastructure maintenance for the watershed department, about $600,000 to maintain those green infrastructure sites. The next major category is electricity. Obviously, the majority of this is for operations, and as you can see, the majority of that is for the Southerly wastewater treatment plant, almost half of the nearly $10 million. Our current contract for electricity supply to Southerly, this administration building and outlying facilities, is up in May. We're going through the process of an RFP for that electricity supply right now, and we do anticipate increases in that cost, and that is factored into this budget, as well as allowances for fluctuation in weather, water through the plant can drive up the costs in a wet year. The next category that I'm going to detail is chemicals. This is a part of the materials and supplies group in the packet. Chemicals are obviously used at all three plants for the wastewater treatment process. As you can see, we're projecting a $1 million increase, but from a $3 million actuals of last year to about $4 million. We have seen significant inflationary increases in our most recent contracts for several of these chemicals. We have seen 6% increases in the cost of sodium hypochlorite, 13% for sodium bisulfite, 12% for liquid emulsion polymer, and 9% for ferric chloride, as well as projected increases in usage for those chemicals. That is getting us to our $1 million increase in that category.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
I could. Just in general, I kind of understand what's happening here, obviously, as we continue to ramp up the program. We're collecting more at the plants, more has to be treated. Are we having any concern or challenge, not just around, first around procurement of chemicals, and what type of contingency plans do we have for backup for that, and or do we have challenges regarding the trucking and scheduling of these products to make sure we have them in a timely and anticipated manner?
Good morning, President Brown. We were anticipating some challenges earlier on in the pandemic, and in fact, we struggled a little bit with getting polymer deliveries. We had plenty, but we had to order those in advance, and so we were doing much more tracking, making sure that we were ordering in advance to make sure that we had the chemicals when we needed. So we did not see any major problems with any supplies, but we were watching closely. We were able to get through that.
Okay, thank you.
And the last large category also within materials and supplies that I wanted to touch on today is software. As you can see, unlike professional services, this is an area where we're seeing increased cost over time. This category includes maintenance fees associated with traditional on-site applications such as our Oracle e-business application. It also includes annual fees associated with newer cloud service software as well. That's where we're seeing the real drive in the increase of this over time. Those types of software typically come with lower upfront capital costs, but higher year-to-year maintenance costs. So that's why we're seeing this increase. A few items of note in this category include our UKG software for payroll and timekeeping in HR, as well as our Microsoft Office 365 software for about $330,000. The new project management software, Kahua, for our technical services group in engineering of about $260,000. So this encompasses software, new and old, across the district, but it is an area where we're seeing growing costs as the costs in general of software increases, but also with the move to more investment in cloud as opposed to on-premise software.
Ken, I'll ask the same question President Brown asked again. Are we going to look at any issues getting software and people to manage it as we go along?
Mayor Lai, members of the committee. So as Ken outlined, we've been moving steadily, as most entities have, from on-prem perpetual licenses to cloud-based software. It results in higher annual costs instead of spikes of purchasing perpetual licenses once every few years. But it does offload a lot of the effort, the hardware to run that software, the manpower to maintain that software. So there are savings otherwise. So we actually see it as protecting the district by offloading some of those risks and maintenance to our cloud providers. Looking at the increase, this is a general trend we're probably seeing in all areas of business. From last year to this year, we can attribute 87% of the increase to some of the projects Ken mentioned, CMMS, which replaced WAM, which had been in place for a long time, Kahua, which is replacing a SharePoint system. We are upgrading our Oracle database, which is a significant increase to maintain the level of support that we need to. But the other driver that we're seeing, and it's hitting all of these years, is cybersecurity. The threat landscape is increasing rapidly. The district follows the NIST, or National Institute of Standards and Technology, cybersecurity framework. Through external and internal audits, we are following those recommendations to protect the data and the network itself. And those costs are going to continue to increase as the threats continue to increase. But all of these purchases are maintained and tracked in our Sharewell system. We are always very close on our budget versus actual for software because these are not discretionary spends. We're obligated by contract, but we follow the bidding process, and we're very careful with the ratepayers' money to make sure we're getting the best bang for our buck in all of these areas.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I could?
Sure.
Just related to that, kind of one of the last things you mentioned about cybersecurity and the potential for attack, which is a very real threat. So to the extent you said we were following some recommended procedures as it relates to insurance for ransomware attacks and those types of things. So do we have a level of comfort that both we're protected and we have a good plan in place that will support what would be needed should we have that type of cybersecurity problem?
So there are two sides to that question. On the insurance front, we are in the process of negotiating cyber insurance coverage. I will say it's a very, very challenging environment right now. Because of the uptick in cyber incidents, insurance companies aren't really willing to issue a lot of cyber insurance. And they've upped the bar about what you have to have in place in order to obtain that insurance. We are implementing those recommendations, and we're meeting with our partners in the next week or so to look at the coverage that we can attain. The other side of that question is, are we following and are we prepared? We continually strive to be as best prepared for an event that we can be. A single cybersecurity event can cost millions of dollars and time and productivity and performance. So the investment's well worth it. We are heavily engaged with governmental agencies like CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, and NACWA and our other partners in other water industries. We have consortiums and meetings that we constantly discuss this, and we're trying to raise the level of cybersecurity for all of the utilities across the nation. So we are doing the best we can in that area.
Well, I hear that, but I'm really concerned about NEORSD right now. So to the extent that we can get to outcome closure and when, I think the board would be interested in understanding when that does occur, and to make sure that we're doing everything that we need to do to get in alignment with the things that insurers might be requiring for us to get there. Because, as you said, that threat is very real and prevalent out there in the environment right now. It's a huge risk. And so mitigating that risk as soon as possible is in our best interest. So to the extent that we can do that and follow up at an appropriate point, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, thank you. Appreciate it.
So, just to summarize, these are the major categories that I walked through. Their differences from 2021 actuals to 2022 budgets. This is just sort of a slide to reconcile the difference between those two of what we just talked about. If there are any questions, any further questions on operating expenses? If not, I will move on to capital for 2022.
Thank you.
So taking a slide from Devana, we have, this is our planned awards for 2022. We're anticipating 20 new contract awards, 13 construction, and 7 professional services. That total value of about just under $250 million, with the majority, $212 million, being new construction projects. A little detail about what makes up that $248.7 million on the construction side. The forthcoming award of the Westerly Chemically Enhanced High Rate Treatment Facility will be the largest project awarded this year. I will note that and the Shoreline Storage Tunnel are the only 2 projects that we will take out loans on this year. All the rest of the new projects on this list will be cash funded. Including the Shoreline Consolidated Sewer, which you see is a large, significant project at over $55 million. Southerly PLC replacement, $17.8 million. The largest professional services that will be awarded this year will be the suite of testing and construction inspection services contracts at $14 million, the Kingsbury Run Consolidation Sewer professional service contract at $10.4 million. So looking briefly at that award schedule, I just want to look forward in time, look forward in time at the next 5 years of what we anticipate the CIP to look like. As you can see, still significant cash flows, over $200 million every year through 2026 as we move through some large consent decree projects. Then briefly moving year to year, the largest anticipated spends in each year. This year, the Shoreline Storage Tunnel at about $76.9 million. Shoreline Consolidated Sewer at $16.7 million. In the next year, the Shoreline Storage Tunnel continues for another $50 million, as well as the Shoreline Consolidated Sewer for $32.9 million. Into 2024, Westerly CEHRT project pops to the top of the list at 32.1. Southerly Tunnel will be a new project in 2024 with just under $80 million anticipated cash flow for that project. Southerly Tunnel continues into 2025 for almost $130 million that year. Easterly Chemically Enhanced High Rate Treatment makes the list in 2025 at $35 million. And then into 2026, Southerly Tunnel at $82.3 million. So we'll be letting some significant projects in the next few years that are really driving this capital plan, all CSO consent decree projects.
Mr. Chairman? A lot of money. So with these projects, with the completion or the anticipated completion of these projects, do we have any idea where we'll be in terms of percentage of capture for compliance with the consent decree?
President Brown, are you talking about these specific projects that are laid out in the next 5 years?
Well, I'm talking about them specifically, but kind of in an accumulation and cumulative respect, where does that put us towards our total goal in terms of a percentage? Do you know?
Well, we're currently at about 1.6 billion or 1.7. Within the next 3 years, we'll be upwards of 2 billion in overall control. And with some of these large ones that are coming on, we'll be pushing towards that 2.5 to 3 billion in control.
Okay, so we'll be getting 80% plus.
Yes, a big portion of the overall 4 billion gallons that we'll get with the full consent decree will be accomplished with these projects that you see here. The only really big remaining one, President Brown, is the Big Creek Tunnel System. So this is pretty much the peak.
Okay. All right, well, looks like, well, I'm sure the federal EPA is kind of watching as closely as we are, just to make sure that we're not just spending the money, but we're getting the outcomes that we're looking for. So that gets to be interesting. And then at an appropriate point in time, we'll have to have a conversation about what happens kind of post this area, because we'll start to spend a lot of money for, as I understand it, a lot less benefit in terms of the environmental impact, what we'll get. So the opportunity to continue to have that dialogue with the federal government on perhaps some other things that we can do that will help impact maybe at the local level would be a conversation we should begin to revisit at an appropriate point in time.
So digging a little bit deeper into specifically the 2022 expected capital spend, as you can see, the $262.8 million, almost 2/3 of that is related to the consent decree, $170.1 million, with various other categories that make up the remainder. Looking briefly at a few of these other categories, minor capital, so these are items not on Devana's capital plan, but items directly purchased, including software, vehicles, and items of that sort. Some of the largest items planned in the minor capital for this year include an enterprise wireless implementation at the plants, an annual refresh of desktops and laptops, as well as several other software implementation. Looking at the projects from a funding source perspective, we have two main funding sources for our capital plan, our WPCLF loans and cash at this point. For the year, we're anticipating total funding available of about $576 million. And how are we going to spend that? 181.3 of the capital plan will be funded with WPCLF loans. The Shoreline Storage Tunnel is the largest of those at $76.9 million. Westerly Tunnel Dewatering Pump Station at 17.7, and then the Westerly Storage Tunnel at $15.9 million. Cash funding for the year, we have a significant number of projects that will be cash funded. As I mentioned earlier, the Shoreline Consolidation Sewer We'll spend $16.9 million on that project. Pearl and Jennings Road storage tanks and pump station upgrades of $12.9 million. And the design of the southerly tunnel and consolidation of about $9.2 million. So you see we have a wider variety of large projects now that are moving into that cash funding bucket. So at this point, I'm going to transition into a discussion of debt service, and really as I head into that, I'm going to talk specifically about our capital financing plan. We have been working with our financial advisor from Baker Tilly Municipal Advisors for really the past year plus on developing a plan to best utilize the resources that we have, the cash reserves that we know we have at this point, our outstanding debt and the options we have to refinance that or other transactions associated with that, and as well as the new debt that we do want to issue. So there's three components of that plan that we've developed in the last year. The first piece was the 2021 bond refinancing. So as we looked at that refinancing, we were very targeted in the maturities that we refinanced in that, our outstanding bonds, and also the bonds that we did not refinance. We specifically left behind $71.1 million of those 2014 bonds for potential targets for defeasance. We did defease a portion of that in December. The other piece of that was the shoreline storage tunnel loan. That's the structured loan that we worked with OWDA to develop. The plan there was to impact long-term rates by deferring principal into years beyond our current outstanding debt peaks. And some of this also fills in the years for the defeased bonds that we're replacing from the 2014s. The final piece of the three components were the actual defeasance themselves. As I mentioned, in December we defeased with $30 million. We defeased $27.4 million in bond principal. So the approach all along was to have the greatest long-term impact on interest costs and therefore rates for the customers. As I mentioned, and as we talked through the rate study, we're moving more towards cash funding, but with still some loan funding for our capital program. We have already gone to the board for authorization to enter in agreements for the two loans that we will take this year. The shoreline storage tunnel, that's going to be a 40-year loan with a 1.57% interest rate over a 40-year term. The westerly chemically enhanced high rate treatment, that's to be determined bid amount on that project, but the high end of the engineer's estimate was 92.8. Right now, the terms for March for OWDA for a 20-year loan is 0.86%. That will probably increase a bit for April when we tend to get that on their board agenda. But I want to contrast those to the outstanding bonds that we defeased. So in 2021, as I mentioned, we defeased a portion of the 2014s that we left behind on purpose. We also have 51.7 additional 2014 bonds outstanding. Those have a 4% coupon. So the real key to this strategy is to take advantage of the current low interest rates, ultra low interest rates that we're still experiencing, and utilizing the cash to defease the higher debt that we have that is outstanding. We still have $1.9 billion in debt outstanding, about $1 billion in bonds, and $900 million in OWDA loans. Executing this strategy allows us to keep that debt total, but at a significantly reduced interest cost. If we just move forward immediately cash funding these large projects, we would have less cash in the bank, but we would still have 4% debt outstanding. So this strategy, by utilizing that cash to target the old high-rate debt, allows us to spend down cash in a more efficient way and reduce interest cost over the long term. And that's really the crux of the long-term plan of finance. And as we move forward in that, we have options. So over the next 2 years, we anticipate 2 more OWDA loans. We have the option to take those loans. We have the option to take partial loans. So if we're still not comfortable with our cash position as we move into next year, Easterly Chemically Enhanced High Rate Treatment is a project on the loan list for next year, and I believe that's over $100 million project. We could take a partial loan on that and use cash for part of it to offset that, or we could explore further debt defeasance depending on what interest rates look like. So the plan is to continue to monitor the market, where interest rates are as it relates to our outstanding debt as opposed to debt we could take out, look at those cash balances, and really come up with the best way to impact rates long term, to reduce interest costs for our customers and keep rates as low as possible.
Ken, yeah, I really believe that the board would be interested in these partial loans, is if you look at the, storage tunnel, that I will be 100 years old when that debt is paid, exactly 100 years old. So I think that's it with the cash balances. If we have those options to take partial loans on some of those and reduce what some may see a large cash balance, that would be an option I think the board would be very interested in.
Yes, and as we get to that point, we'll walk through the rationale of what we propose going forward, because the most economical may be to defease other outstanding debt. We specifically left these 2014 bonds because they were the most, there was the most economic advantage to defeasing them. We had over 100% savings interest savings by defeasing those bonds. So it could be a combination of all those things, and we'll walk through the thought process when we get to that point, because it could be defease $30 million in debt, take the first $50 million of the project in cash, and then a loan for $100 million, for instance, is how the math might work out best for the long-term impact. And we'll walk through that when we cross those lines. We have that project, the chemically enhanced high rate treatment, and then the Southerly Tunnel project is a total of over $300 million, and that project will be starting in 2024. So over the next 2 years, we'll have significant opportunity to utilize this cash to the best use possible.
Mr. Chairman, just I'm good to hear the update in terms of what the planning is in that regard. I think to the extent that the board has a good idea when not the discussion takes place, but when we get to a decision point, so that we understand financially where we are in terms of that cash balance. When we approved the 5-year rate structure period, it was with the anticipation that we knew we had a lot of capital on the rear end that we were going to be funding out of cash. So as to when that happens is an important thing for this board to know. The planning was, we support the planning, but understanding when the actual spend down occurs, so that cash reserve that we built up, begins to do what it was planned for is important for us as a body.
I would agree. And I want to just commend you right now for the defeasance and those savings as well. Thank you. You can move on.
Thank you, Mayor. And President Brown, this slide sort of addresses your question, at least in terms of where it stands with our current plan. So this plan, this is a slide actually pulled forward from the 10-year study plan, because now seemed like the right time to bring this up. But we're showing cash balances and then the days cash on hand as the red line. So factors to remember over time is that as the operating expenses go up, you need more cash to maintain the certain number of days, obviously, and conditions change. But by executing the plan of finance as proposed right now, and we will probably, after mid-year, after monitoring revenues and cash balances, look to propose the defeasance. If we execute that defeasance this year, we can reduce our days cash on hand from the current, from the year end of about 1,475 to just about 1,200 days cash on hand, about a $12 million decrease in the outstanding cash balance. So this plan this year will begin that path to get those cash balances closer to historical norms. And this plan, as it lays out, anticipates full loan funding of those projects and no further defeasance. So as we go year by year, we will continue to monitor this, and this will adjust based on our conditions. So I wanted to lay this out, and your question, led right well into this slide, President Brown.
Thank you.
So then just briefly to recap in terms of where we anticipate being for our debt service coverages for the year. So these are the coverages for our rating agencies associated with the current year's ability to cover outstanding debt. Total revenue for debt services about $384.5 million minus operating expenses net equals about $250 million available for debt service. And as you can see, we meet both of our coverage goals and all of our highest level goals. The main driver is always the debt service on all debt at 2.09 times. We're well above my management target of 1.5 times coverage on that. But I will note it is not insignificant. The $119.5 million debt service is the highest that we've ever had for a single year. So we're in strong financial condition to meet all our coverages, but the obligation continues to be there and grow.
Okay.
So with that, I'll pause and ask if there are any questions on any further questions on the sewer budget. Okay. If not, I'm going to turn it now to Shola Ojo. He's our Manager of Finance and Compliance in the Finance Department, and he's going to walk through the 2022 Stormwater Budget.
Thank you, Ken. I really don't know how you remember all those facts, but that was pretty good. So, good morning, President Brown. Good morning, other committee members. So I am here to present the 2022 Stormwater Budget. So just a quick overview of the program. It's a self-funding program by itself, meaning that the operating revenue that we collect has to support the operating expenses and the capital expenses for the account. So that actually creates challenges as we do the budget on a yearly basis and as we monitor our spend on a yearly basis as well. But our ultimate goal right now is to spend the cash down in the account, and we've been trying to do that over the last few years now. But this budget that we're presenting is meant to also do that again for the 2022 fiscal year. So we are going to talk about the projected revenue and the anticipated operating and capital expenses for the account. So our first slide that we're looking at here compares the 2022 rate study versus the 2022 budget. As you look at the revenue numbers, we're projecting to spend $46.3 million or to collect revenue of $46.3 million in the account, which is the same thing as our rate study that we recently did. For the operating expenses, we're looking at a decrease of 13.7%. But usually when we're in the accounts, it is cash funded, we tend to move money between the operating expenses and the capital projects. So you will also notice that there's a big increase in the capital projects of 87.5%. But when you do combine both of the expenses for the operating expenses and the capital projects, we see that there's only a difference of $2.2 million in the rate study versus the 2022 budget. So our next slide looks at our 2021 budget versus our 2022 budget. For the operating revenue, we're projecting an increase of 7.2%, and that is tied to the rate increase that we see of 4.2% set in the rate study and approved by the board. For the operating expenses, again, similar to what you saw in the previous slide, it's a combination of the operating expenses and the capital projects moving. So in the operating expenses, there's a 5.9% increase. And then in the capital project, there's a 21.0% increase as well. So some of the capital projects that we're looking to do this year includes the debris, racks, and access road improvements for $2 million. And then we're looking to do the Mill Creek stabilization project for $550,000. And our biggest capital expenses is in the acquisition of land. So we're looking to spend about $4 million for the acquisition of land in the program itself. So our next slide here compares our operating revenue. So for 2022, our operating revenue is set at $46.3 million. And at the end of the year, we collected $44.3 million for the 2021 revenue. As you can see, most of our revenue is driven by what we collect from the customers. So a portion of that revenue, 25%, is set to go into our community cost share program, while 75% stays with this district, the sewer district, to go ahead and do our stormwater program. And we collect a little bit of interest income that actually goes again to what we do at the sewer district for the program as well. So this next slide looks at our 2021 actual operating expenses versus our 2022 budget operating expenses. So for 2022, we're looking to spend about $35.8 million in the operating expense budget. Most of those expenses are within the categories of professional services and contractual services, so that's about 75%. Compared to sewer, where the cost driver is salaries and benefits, in the stormwater program, the cost drivers are actually the stormwater projects themselves. And those categories are usually spent in the professional service line for design and master plans, and then for the construction piece of the projects in contractual services. Another line item you're going to notice in here is the indirect cost allocation. So we set that at $4.2 million, and basically that's just the support and admin services that the sewer provides to the program, such as finance, legal services, and other related admin services as well. So our operating expenses for 2021 was $21.6 million, which is a difference of $14.2 million from the budget. So some of that are driven because of delays in projects, and as we go through this presentation, the director, Frank Greenland, is going to give us more update on what they plan on doing to actually spend the budget of $35.8 million this year. So we will get further details on that. Our current staffing levels for stormwater is at 40 for 2022 budget, and as you can see, we've had a stable staffing level for the program itself, and we do believe this is going to be enough to sustain managing the program and making sure we're doing what the goals and mission of the program is set for. Moving on to the next slide. So this is our professional services. Like I said before, this category really is where we do our stormwater master plans and then the design of the projects as well. So you'll notice from 2018 to 2019, we had big spend in those accounts, and those were tied to our stormwater master plan projects that we were doing. But moving into 2022, we're budgeting $9.6 million in the account, and most of those are going to be in the stormwater projects line for design of $6.4 million. Some of those projects that we have in the design includes the Big Creek Stream Restoration program project for $750,000, the Downbrook Restoration project for $600,000, the stabilization the Mill Creek Stabilization near Creekland for $550,000. We also have $2 million set aside for smaller design projects with the GES contracts. And then we have $700,000 set for the stormwater master plans projects as well. The next slide is our contractual services, and I think this slide depicts the challenges that we do have running a straight cash program in the stormwater project. As you can see, the numbers go up and down throughout the 5 years. But in 2019, we did spend $20.3 million to really drive down the cash balances we had at that point. But then in 2020, you see a big decrease to $6.6 million, which is due to COVID impacts. And then in 2021, we spent $5.7 million, again due to the timing of projects and the delay and projects delay. That Frank Greenland is going to we'll get more details on that. For 2022, we are projecting to spend $17.4 million. The biggest part of that is the stormwater construction projects themselves of $11.2 million. And some of the projects we have in there are the Chippewa Creek Stabilization Project for $1 million, the Pepperloos Creek Culvert for $2 million, the Chippewa Creek Stream Stabilization for $1.3 million, the Bellow Dam Improvements Project for $1.3 million, and other projects that we have set aside for that. Also, we have $2.7 million set aside for the stormwater maintenance. So that's just related to debris and minor sediment removals, grant maintenance, and small-scale dredging projects. And we also have a $300,000 budget for collection fees that we pay to the city of Cleveland, similar to what we do with stormwater. So at this point, I'm going to kick it to Frank Greenland to provide more details on our 2021 spend and our planned spending for the 2022.
All right, Shola, if you could drive these slides. I wanted to show the projects that were delayed in 2021 to give you some appreciation of the budget amount that we lost in cash flow and some of the reasons behind the delays. Easements can be very problematic, and easements cost us. We do partner with other communities on implementation of projects. They too had property acquisition. The Middleburg Heights Partner Project has been bogged down a little bit with acquisition. Hudson had a permit delay and then actually bid out a project, and the bids came in over the estimate, and they had to reject. So we're back to the drawing board, and we feel confident that project can go forward. Dominion Gas as well on a big project had transmission main relocation issues. We thought they were ready to go. They delayed, and it cost us. We think virtually all of these projects are going to be let this year, and you've already approved some of them. Next slide. So what impacts cash flow on the stormwater program the most is the easement property negotiation piece. We've been very successful at acquiring voluntary acquisition of properties, getting the easements we need to do projects. Every project requires some type of easement, temporary or permanent. President Brown, you have the pleasure of reading the long list of property issues each and every board meeting. We've actually done well, but it's been a trying process over the last couple of years, just getting people to commit, getting in front of people, but the fight goes on. So that's one. Permitting and constraints on construction. The permitting world kind of bogged down during COVID, the initial years of COVID. We couldn't get out and do bat surveys. You need to do bat surveys to cut down trees, and we were prohibited from doing that. So there's been some permit-related issues. We used to have permit delays with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. We came up with a cooperative agreement with them. Those, by and large, have gone away. So that's good news, and we have to look for other, ways to get around permitting challenges. the master planning process is complete. So now in terms of cash flow and budgeting, we are looking at extremely large projects that we have to properly stage, a number of smaller projects, so just fitting those pieces to the puzzle is really what we're trying to do now. So going forward, next slide. The board just approved the latest advanced planning contract. So we wanted to get that contract in place to start taking large master planning projects and do the detailed analysis to drill down to what type of project is it, what's its cost, how can we phase it. We have a number of general engineering service design contracts and straight design contracts, and we want to up, letting those design projects so that we can design more projects to fit them into the cash flow piece. We are tracking trends, what's actually hanging us up on any given projects, and looking for ways to mitigate them, similar to what we did with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineer issue in the past. And long-term, all the master plans are in. We know where our property interests are. And to execute a large stormwater project in this area takes a lot of easements and potential acquisitions. So we're trying to be very strategic long-term when opportunities present themselves in these larger project areas to take advantage of those opportunities.
Frank, could I ask you a question?
Sure.
When we have storms and your gentlemen and ladies that are out there inspecting and cleaning up streams due to issues that happen, is that under your inspection and maintenance budget? Is that where that comes in? If it gets bigger, like that tunnel we had to clean out, then we go out to bid, correct?
Right, that's right. Our stormwater inspection maintenance, we have inspection staff on staff, maintenance contractors too. Maintenance contractors east and west, that once the inspection is made, debris needs to come out, work order, and they get the debris out.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, kind of a slide back, I saw a $28 million plus number for, looks like Upper Lower Shaker Lake.
28.3.
Is that, I think because, I think the original number, I recall, was about 20 million for this effort. So is this a new number? Or?
This is the combined total for two projects. This is both Horseshoe Lake, and then following Horseshoe is Lower Lake, dam rehabilitation at Lower Lake. So that is our combined total for those two projects.
And then you hydraulically modeled kind of the entire road.
Yes.
So there are other projects anticipated, including projects downstream. Are there estimates for those as well?
There are estimates from the master plan for other projects. The issue, each and every year we prioritize projects, trying to do worst first where we can. And so now we have the Lake Erie Trips master plan. We're just wrapping it up. So we're going to go into another series of prioritization for projects to see what, bubbles up to the top and how we implement. We've got $1.4 billion across the service area. So we want to be very strategic on where we increase levels of service across this area and address very risky situations that are out there.
Priorities is how do you do that? So is that just impacted areas, that areas with population versus green space, et cetera? Is there a ranking thing that we use?
There are different. We stole stuff from engineering actually, and then modified it on how we prioritize infrastructure investments. It's based on risk. So risk might be how many flooded basements or flooded structures. Risk might be inundated roads. How many can we solve with a given project? Risk might be erosion threats to bridges, houses, whatever. So those all factor in the readiness of the project and its cost. And there are other factors.
I'm not sure about the rest of the board, but, those things interest me. It's because I understand the pain and suffering that goes with folks living with this for many, many years. So to the extent that, we took on this issue a number of years ago, and there's a funding process that gets us through it, but again, it's a big number at this point in time, 1.4 billion, and again, I imagine there'll be some federal funds that are now available that'll help us do some of these things more sooner than later. So maybe an opportunity to kind of look at where we're going, because I know we had a strategy at the onset, but if funds become available and we can accelerate some things, it'd be helpful to know what that would look like. So.
We are scouring the infrastructure bill to look for those pots of money. Many of the additional funds are in existing pots of money that we're well aware of, different agencies, FEMA, the Corps, others. So we're taking a look at, what might we be able to tap into, and we've been successful in the Cuyahoga area concern with some funding, federal funding that came in.
Yeah, and I think one of our advantages is we've done a lot of the engineering work behind, so that it's not just that we know there's a problem. We've done studies that kind of say, here's how we would mitigate this issue. Here's a project that, if funded, we could do so. Kind of shovel ready. We have a lot of that. So I'm just, again, saying, we're in a good position.
Yes, we are.
So let's take advantage of our good position.
And I think that the community cost share, there's a lot of good stuff happening at the local level. A lot of good stuff.
100%.
I would agree, and at 1.4 billion, we want to make sure we're prioritized correctly. And this is one of those cases, we want to make sure the squeaky wheel does get that grease. And that's one thing I want to make sure the board focuses in on, because, and again, not to be counter to President Brown, but sometimes shovel-ready is maybe not the best project for somebody else. So I want to just make sure our prioritization is correct as we go forward in all of this. Thank you.
Frank, weren't we were more than just successful? Didn't we acquire a significant grant?
It's a $7 million grant from the federal government. It's a GLRI grant to help fund the construction of the West Creek flume job, which you'll see. It's a very large job. And you will see that as soon as we get through a few easement challenges there as well.
$7 million is significant in a $40 million program.
So, moving on. Our goal for the program is to definitely track the expenses and revenue, and we work well with the Stormwater team to do that with finance. But right now, we're going to turn to the 10-year lock-time plan, and Ken is going to walk us through that.
Thank you, Shola. All right, we are in the home stretch now. I will talk briefly about our 10-year long-term financial plan for sewer. Shola will present a few slides on the 10-year plan as it relates to stormwater. We'll tie that all together, and then there's just a few brief items at the end that we'll touch on. So what is our 10-year plan? Every year within the finance department, we essentially go through a rate study process, not as detailed as the full rate study process, but we take the rate model that our consultant gives us, and we project out the next 10 years based on a variety of factors. We plug in our budgets, the 10-year CIP that engineering gives us, our debt service and revenue projections are all factored into that. Just like out of the rate study, this gives us potential estimated customer impacts, ratio analysis, and ultimately rates and customer bills that we expect to see over the 10-year period. So looking briefly at the projection for O&M expenses, 2022 represents our current budget. We have inflationary factors associated with various categories of costs. So salaries at about 3% a year, benefits at about 7% a year, utilities at 3%, many other expenses around 3%. Make sure that we have a conservative and robust estimate in terms of what our operating expenses might look like going forward. And in this projection, as you can see, we get to about $190 million by 2031 as our estimated O&M for sewer. The capital improvement plan is significant still, but I think this chart points out what Devonna was mentioning, that we're really through a bulk of the consent decree related capital by 2028. We stay over $200 million through then, but then you see a few lighter years on the tail end as we move through Shoreline Tunnel, Southerly Tunnel, and other significant projects. Over the 10-year period, we're projecting about $2.3 billion in capital cost, and about $1.4 billion of that is CSO cost. How does that translate in debt service? Debt service is an area where we've seen significant decreases from prior projections through our debt management strategies. As you can see, we have this year's estimate of about $120 million. By 2031, it's about $156.3 million. When we were running these estimates coming out of the last rate study, we were estimating years where we would see $200 million in debt service, and even debt service higher than operating expenses. So this is a slide that I think shows the value of our approach in terms of finding ways to reduce that interest cost on that $1.9 billion in debt that we do have outstanding. Some factors that go into this include our outstanding bonds, our outstanding loans, projected new loans, and this projection also includes the anticipated 2022 defeasance that I spoke about earlier that we would bring to the board later this year. So that defeasance would save about $2 million a year in debt service as well. So how does that translate in terms of our ratios? So from a financial perspective, we're well covered. We meet all our minimum targets. As you can see in the long out years, we get close to our 1.5 times total debt service, similar to the patterns that we saw in the rate study, but this represents full coverage of all of our debt service ratios. This slide is a summary of, as it sits right now, anticipated revenue requirements and revenues. So the blue line represents revenues, and the requirements are in the bars. And as you can see, there's several years where those requirements are higher than the revenue. That represents using down surpluses. And this is where, as we go through the financial planning in these next 2 years, we can make adjustments to this plan, utilize more of those reserves. As I mentioned, this year we'll spend about $50 million potentially on a debt defeasance. We have in 2023 another year where we're using capital for projects, and we have the ability and the tools in place to adjust this as we see where our balances in the economy and other factors are leading us. So at the end of the day, this results in a rate schedule that is slightly better than the 10-year plan rate schedule. We maintain through 2026 our 4.2% rate increases. In this modeling, we're able to slightly lower our 2027 through 2031 projections. In the rate study, we had an average of 4.4% increase per year in those next 5 years. In this planning, we were able to fine-tune that to about 4% per year. So every year we'll continue to look at these, fine-tune these projections, so as we move into the next rate study, which will be here before we know it for some of us. It will be hopefully a very fine-tuned estimate that continues to take advantage of savings. A typical customer bill for sewer for 2022, based on our current rates, is about $65.85 a month. In 2031, it goes up to about $94.05 a month. For a homestead customer, the bill this year will be about $39.33, and in 2031, that'll be $56.43. So that's the overview of the sewer 10-year long-term financial plan. And as I mentioned earlier, I pulled that cash projection slide forward. If there's any questions on the long-term planning for sewer, I'd be glad to take those. Otherwise, I'll turn it back to Shola to talk about stormwater.
Ken, can you just, Marilai, if I can just interject, Ken, if you can go back to the last slide. I just want to highlight that this is the result of this plan of finance that Ken and his team laid out. So when we're talking about the cash reserves and using those to the long-term benefit of the ratepayer, this is the timeline over which we're focused. So I just wanted to.
And while we're there, let me ask, and again, the rate stabilization reserve, you had 18 million last year, 18 this year. I kind of understand why it's there. What typically do we take it from that account, and is it static at 18 million or years past? Because I don't have an overview of that. So can you explain it in layman's term to me, please?
So that account is not a requirement, but a factor considered by rating agencies when it comes to our rating. It is simply an account that if we had a year where we had a unexpected decline in revenue, we could pull funds from that account to increase that year's revenue so that we meet debt service coverage. We established the account over 10 years ago. We haven't added any funds to it in several years because we have such strong coverage typically year to year. And we've never pulled from it. We don't anticipate adding anything to it at this point either, because we have projected coverages that are well in line with even our highest targets.
Okay, great. So then if it's collecting money goes back in the general fund, or?
Yeah, we don't add interest to that account. It goes into the capital account to fund capital projects.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome, Mayor. Okay, Sheldon.
So we're going to walk through the Stormwater 10-year long-term plan. So the first slide is going to show the expense projection for O&M and capital. As you can see, in the very early years, we plan on spending down the cash balances. And by 2031, we're looking to be at $50 million for O&M expenses. Our next slide is the stormwater projected revenues. So you can see a steady increase in the projected revenues. For 22 to 2026, we're looking at 4.2% of the rate increases. And then from 27 to 2031, we're looking at 5% in the rate increases. Hopefully enough to sustain the program for all the expenses and capital projects that we're looking to accomplish as well. Similar slide that Ken just presented. So this is a typical stormwater customer bill. So for a regular customer in the residential tier 2 program, they are looking to spend about $5.32 monthly for 2022, and by 2031, that's going to go up to $8.10 with the rate increases that we have factored in the model. And for the affordability program, we're looking at $2.16 for 2022, and by 2031, that's going to be $3.24. So our next slide shows our revenue requirements versus the projected net revenues. Again, in 2022, 23, and 24, we're looking to eat into those cash balance position that we have in the stormwater account. And then 2025 to 3031, we're looking to have a balance account. And we're also meant to maintain our 90-day reserve in the account. So this model does factor in maintaining the 90-day reserve in the program as well. So Ken is going to walk us through this last slide, and we'll wrap this up.
So this slide basically ties all the 10-year plan together in terms of a total customer impact. So this represents our NEORSD's customer combined sewer stormwater bill over our 10-year projection period. In 2022, a regular customer will pay about $70.95 a month, and by 2031, it's $102.15. And a homestead and affordability customer will spend about $41.49 a month. By 2031, their bill will be $59.67. So as I mentioned, this is an exercise we go through every year, and it's really the result of all the work we do year to year, presenting this budget, streamlining it, the financing, all the work in the capital program to value engineer, find savings, and we'll continue every year to refine this and do everything we can to keep these long-term rates as low as possible. Are there any other questions on the long-term financial plan? The document itself is in the packet. The full written document of the 10-year long-term financial plan has some more detail to it.
Fine, thank you.
And then just a few final items. This slide is just a summary of within the packet our public purpose items. So these are our public purpose policy. Requires us specifically to call out certain categories of expenses and present them to the Finance Committee. The largest items of note in here include the Green Infrastructure Grants Program of about $1.4 million for this year, the MCIP of about $7.5 million, and a variety of other specific items outlined in our policy. If there's any specific questions on anything within there, I'd be glad to take them. And then with that, the last item included in your packet is just a list of budget transfers. We're also required to present to the Finance Committee any place where we must do a budget transfer to cover an overage of $100,000 or more. There were not very many of them this year. Some of them were related to budget reclassified items and the like, but I would also take any questions on that. So that concludes our presentation for today. I would just like to acknowledge Shola Ojo, as well as Rob Rad and Jamie Thompson from the Finance Department, who've done a lot of the work to put together that packet that you have, this presentation as well. And then Kyle, senior staff, and all of management, because in the entire time I've had this role, this budget process has never been difficult. Everyone has submitted budgets within the requested parameters. All the discussions have been very, very fruitful and worthwhile. And it's just a very cooperative group that Kyle sets the tone to really make sure we're looking for savings whenever we can to be able to impact that long-term rate and impact on customers. So that's the end of my presentation, Mayor, and I'm glad to take any other questions.
Thank you. You have any questions?
No, just want to thank Ken and the team for an overview for a very expansive budgeting process, but a lot of checks and balances and systems of accountability, and obviously a lot of work ahead to do.
Thank you. And as well, thank you for a clear and concise explanation of the budget and to go through it, and all of the staff. Devonna, we didn't have to pick on you, so. And seriously, though, it is a good process. You know, I read through a lot of this earlier, had some questions, looked at it. Most of the questions I had in my head were answered as you went through the presentation. And I appreciate it. And I will be absent at the meeting next week, so I would ask Mr. Brown to take our thoughts known to the full board then.
Will do.
Thank you.
If I could, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
Just one other note, I wanted just to say to Constance, Kyle, and Devonna that the comments that were made on the program for that long title you had was not lost on me. That is an area of concern that Kyle and I have talked about for a while in terms of the opportunity to kind of improve the numbers and the diversity in that section. So this looks like a good opportunity to make some progress in that direction. So I want to express my gratitude and appreciation for coming up with a way to kind of move the needle on that. So
Very good. And to jump on that, that was part of what I meant by let's make sure that squeaky wheel gets the grease.
yeah.
And seriously, that those things that need to be done are done. And I'll just leave it at that.
Well, thank you, Mayor Lyon, thank you, President Brown. I do just, to go a little bit more granular, this was Constance's work to actually charge each department to come up with their own department-specific DE&I goals, and then the department directors, so this came from the departments themselves in terms of a granular approach to actually how do we expand participation. And so this was homegrown in terms of coming up from the department level, so I appreciate that.
Yeah. And I want to acknowledge Ms. Chambers being here and things that are lost on her, I'm sure, MCIP, CSO. She's going to get there. So yeah, make it simple, Constance, that's all I would say. Not just for her, but for myself. I think that's all. Motion to adjourn?
So move.
Aye, we're adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, sir. Good.